And we're continuing on with Boy X on page 222. There are 4 hours and 31 minutes until shutdown. And just a reminder that when we left off in the last chapter, Ash and Isabel had been captured by Cain and her men, and there was just a big blast that Isabel had set off with the hex. A surge of energy blasted through the camp, bringing a cloud of stinging debris. Ash reeled like a drunk, blinking hard in confusion, but the effect wasn't as intense as it had been in the biosphere. His body had already adapted to protect itself, and by the time the second explosion split the night, he had recovered enough to see what was happening. In the canopy, the howler monkeys had whipped into a frenzy of sound and movement. They growled and grunted, leaping from branch to branch. A shower of broken sticks and unripe fruit rained down like a storm, and they bared their teeth, screaming at the men below. Soldiers blindly fired into the forest. Brat-a-tat-tat! Bullets found their mark, slamming into the animals, knocking them from their perches, sending the others wild. The screaming rose in pitch as they encircled the camp like an attacking army. Still disoriented, Ash turned his attention to Pierce, standing just several feet away. He steadied himself, then moved toward him as another detonation tore through the trees. Several monkeys were caught by the explosion, ripped from the forest and propelled into the camp. Ash stumbled in the shockwave, but kept going as a series of hollow pops like balloons bursting came from the forest. White smoke filled the air, and shapes moved in the haze as the howlers began to descend from the trees. Brat-a-tat-tat! Stop firing! Cain ordered. Check your targets! Get them away from me! Pierce's voice came out of the smoke. Ash jogged through the fog toward the voice. He was almost on Pierce now, but something else was coming too. Low, muscular shadows were closing in like demons. The monkeys wouldn't harm him, though. He was sure of it. They were here to protect him. He could walk past them, take the messenger bag, and they wouldn't do a thing to hurt him. He had nothing to be afraid of. But as he took another step towards Pierce, surrounded by chaos, fingers grabbed at the back of his shirt. Ash spun around, putting up his hands ready to fight. But Isabel barreled into him, yelling in his face, "Get down! Flashbang!" Without time to think about it, Ash let Isabel push him toward the fallen log, shoving him into the space where the old tree met the ground. He clamped his hands over his ears as Isabel jammed herself in beside him. Then a fraction of a second later, a deafening bang thundered in his head, and a mind-numbing intense flashed across the clearing. It was as if the sun had burned itself out right there in the camp. Even with his eyes closed and his face buried in the nook of a fallen tree, Ash's whole brain lit up. Cain and Pierce and every other living thing nearby would have been blinded by the flashbang. Once it was over, Ash opened his eyes and got to his feet. The camp was a mess. Debris scattered all over, smoke wafting in the trees. The lid of the wooden crate was splintered, but the large howler that had tried to smash its way out had been caught in the crossfire and was slumped in half in, half out, its lifeless arms trailing on the ground. Many other monkeys, more than Ash could count, sat huddled and afraid, blinking, trying to see. They growled and bared their teeth at the slightest noise. Cain was crouched in the same place Ash had last seen her, both hands covering her eyes. Winter was on the ground, doubled up in pain, and Peterson was lying dead. Around him, the clearing was littered with the corpses of howler monkeys. Pierce was writhing in agony, holding his hands to his face. "Quick!" Isabel grabbed Ash's arm. "There's another soldier out there." Her voice sounded quiet and distant, even though she was shouting. "Get into the forest." Ash was recovering quickly. "Find somewhere safe and stay down." "What?" "Just do it." He headed back into camp. Cain was kneeling now, with her head up and the stock of her rifle pulled tight against her shoulder. Her hearing was probably returning, but Ash could tell she was still blind. "Thorn," she was saying, "we didn't want to leave you in there, but we had no choice. Everything was going wrong, and we had to get out." Some of the monkeys were coming to their senses now. They turned their heads, picking up the voices. Some leaped to their feet and stood on all fours, muscles rippling beneath their fur. They were strong and adaptive. It wouldn't be long before they were on the attack once more. Ash moved out of Cain's line of sight and snatched up a rock, throwing it over her head to land close to Peterson's body. She spun around. "Thorn?" While she was facing away from him, Ash picked up Thorn's survival pack. He slung it over his shoulder and ran to Pierce, grabbing his knife from the forest floor beside him and slipping the blade under the strap of his messenger bag. "Please." Pierce became still and put out his hands as he looked up without seeing anything. His eyes were open, but they moved from side to side as if he was searching for something. And Ash knew the flashbang had blinded him. "Please, Thorn, please. We had to leave you." Cain whipped around again, her weapon pointing toward them. "Thorn, what are you doing?" Ash put the point of the blade against Pierce's chest, letting him feel it digging in. "Don't do this!" The pitch of Pierce's voice heightened as his throat constricted and panic gripped him. The stink of burned plastic flooded from every pore, mixing with the metallic smell that hung in the smoke. "Don't kill me! Cain, don't let him kill me!" Ash looked at his face, glad to see him so afraid. After everything Pierce had done, he deserved this. Dad was dead because of him. Ash began to wonder what it would be like to push the knife harder, to force it all the way through to his shriveled heart. "Don't!" Pierce begged. "Thorn, please!" Ash snapped out of it and leaned down to whisper in his ear. "Type 24 worked better than you thought. I'm not what you think I am, Uncle Damien. I'm even better." Pierce froze. His mind struggled to process who had just spoken and what they had said. What? Ash sliced upward, cutting through the strap and pulling the messenger bag away from Pierce. The scientist stared at nothing, his face fixed in an expression that lay somewhere between fear and confusion. "Better?" Ash held the bag in his left hand, the knife in his right, and stepped away. Cain was still pointing her weapon, the barrel aimed directly at Ash, her eyes looking left and right, blinking harder as her sight returned. Ash moved farther to the side and began to walk backward, careful not to make a sound. "Better?" Pierce said aloud, questioning himself. He sat up, his head turning as if looking for something, but his eyes still failed him. "Better how?" As Ash moved back across the camp. "Better how?" Pierce scrambled onto all fours and began running his hands along the ground, searching for a weapon. "Tell me! Stop! Stay where you are, you little brat! You think you can just walk away from me? Stay where you are!" Ash reached the log and climbed over it, looking back at Pierce, who was turning his head in desperation, crawling about, coming closer to where Peterson's body lay. "Cain!" the scientist shouted. "He's getting away! Stop him! Shoot him! Don't let him get away!" His hand brushed over the body, and he patted along it, finding the right arm, prizing the pistol from Peterson's dead fingers. Without hesitating, he raised it up and fired it into the air in front of him. Crack! Ash flinched, even though the pistol wasn't pointing anywhere near him. "Where are you, you little brat?" Pierce was saying. "Where are you?" The pistol kicked in his hand once more, the shot flying wide and crashing into the trees to Ash's right. He then swiveled and began firing in different directions so the bullets cracked into the forest and thumped into the ground around the clearing. Ash jumped for cover of the fallen tree and looked over at Pierce, firing at anything that made a sound. Cain, on the other hand, was almost perfectly still. She was on one knee, her weapon lowered. Her vision was still hazy, but she knew she was not alone. All around her were the dark shapes of the howler monkeys, They emerged from the forest in the thinning smoke, moving along the ground on all four, tails held high, muscles flowing beneath their fur. "Put your weapons down." Kane's voice was calm. "Pierce, stop shooting." When she unslung her weapon and placed it on the ground, some of the monkeys came forward to swat it away. They stayed close to her, pushing their faces close to hers, baring their teeth and growling. Kane held her hands out to either side and lowered her eyes in submission. "Don't aggravate them." Behind her, Winter had followed her order and was now on his knees, surrounded by monkeys. Pierce, on the other hand, was on his feet, pistol pointed in front of him. He fired again, but it was the last time he pulled the trigger. With a savage outburst of howling, more monkeys came forward as one, seething from the trees, heading for Pierce. A terrifying tidal wave of teeth and nails, they clawed at him, beat at him with their fists, and pulled him to the ground, swarming over him like a pack of rabid wolves. Pierce didn't even have time to scream.